All right, so for this quilt along, in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to put together the double 9 patch block. So for the fabric requirements, you're going to need some of your background fabric as well as 3 of your 1/4 yard cuts. Now you could just use 3/4 of a yard of fabric so that you can have all of the little squares the same color. It's kind of up to you there. Here is how mine looks, and we'll be making 4 of these blocks for the quilt. They're nice and big and they're fairly easy to put together. I show how to put the 9 patches together using the strip method, but if you would prefer to cut each square out, you could go ahead and do that as well. All right, so let's get started.
Let's start cutting. First, grab your background fabric and cut 3 6.5-inch by width of fabric strips. Then subcut those down into 16 6.5-inch squares. After getting those squares cut, you will then cut 6 2.5-inch by width of fabric strips. I like to cut these strips in half afterward, but you can keep them with the fabric if you prefer. I just like cutting them in half so that they're easy to manage when I am sewing. Next, you will grab 2 1/4 yard fabrics. From each of those 1/4 yard fabrics, you will cut 3 2.5-inch by width of fabric strips. Again, you are going to cut these 3 with the fabric strips in half. If you prefer, you can keep them with the fabric if you would like. Again, I just like to cut them in half because it makes them easier for me to manage when I am strip piecing. If you ever get those wonky strips from sewing those long strips together, you know what I mean. Yeah, it's much easier to manage them when they're in half. All right, then you are going to grab another 1/4 yard of fabric. I'm calling it my accent fabric. I am going to cut 2 2.5-inch by width of fabric strips here as well, and then subcut them in half. You will notice that you're going to have fabric left over, so make sure you save that for next
Now that
week.
all the prep work is finished and I have my strips and blocks cut for the first block in this series, it is time to start sewing. So the first strip set that I'm going to sew is going to have a background strip and then the red tree fabric in the center and then another background strip. So I'm going to be sewing 3 strip sets that look like this. All right, so I'm going to put my 2 strips right sides together and then just sew a 1/4 inch seam along one side. I chose to cut these strips in half because to me, I think it is easier to manage these shorter strips like this. I feel like when you get really long strips, sometimes they can get wonky and wavy. You can just want to start sewing really fast and get all the way across to the end and not keep a nice straight 1/4 inch seams. Now, starching this fabric really well helps with, the warping and the waviness that can often happen with really long strips. For me, cutting it in half just really ensures that I'll get a straighter finish. All right, so after sewing that seam, I take it to my pressing area and I just press along that seam just to kind of flatten it and make sure everything is good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the seam toward the red tree fabric. So I'm going to finger press it first just to kind of get that seam working over. And then I'll, of course, add some heat. All right, after that seam is pressed, I'm going to take another background strip and lay it on top of the red tree fabric and sew a cross, making sure that the fabric is lined up as I sew. You could, of course, put some pins in if you would like. I just go through and hold the fabric together and sew. And then just as before, I'm going to bring it over to my pressing area and add some heat along the seam. And then again, I'm going to press the seam toward the red center block. I'm going to first use my fingers to push the fabric over. I just feel like this helps get the fabric working over. It makes sure I don't have any weird folds across there, and just helps the fabric know which way I want it to go, I guess. And then I'm just going to add some heat along the seam to really make sure that it's nice and pressed flat. This will help me bring this block together later if all these seams are nice and flat. And since I starched this fabric before, that will of course help this lay flat as well. All right, so we have the first strip set finished for this block, and I'm going to make 2 more that are just like this. So to do that, I'll just go through that same process. I'll put my background fabric right sides together with that tree fabric that I'm using for the center of this set, and sew across, press, sew across on the other side of the tree fabric, press, and then work on the final strip set. All right, so now I have the 3 strip sets done that have the red in the center and the background on the outer. So it is time to move on to the next strip set, which is going to have 2 of the darker strips of fabric on the outside and then the background in the middle. So here is how that strip set will look. I'm going to have the green vine fabric, the cream background, and then the darker black strip. Now the background on this one is going to be in the center. This is going to be assembled in the same manner as the other strip. However, this time the fabrics are going to be pressed toward the outer block. So it's going to be pressed to the darker fabric. Remember, the first set we did, the seams were pressed to the center. So that will be the only difference here, is that these seams are going to be pressed out, and that will help us nest these fabrics together when we get to that step. All right, so I'm going to go to the sewing machine and get these sewn up. I'm going to sew the strips right side together in this order and press the fabrics. And I'm going to be, again, making 5 of these strip sets. All right, so now I have my 5 strip sets finished, and it is time to start subcutting these strips down so that I can put my smaller 9 patch blocks together. So let me show you how to do that. All right, let's start with this one since we have it out. What we are going to do is line one end of it up on the cutting mat. So I'm going to line it up so that I can get a straight line to start with. So I need to make sure, if I want to cut on this line, you see I'm not meeting the black here, fabric here, but all the rest of them are. So we need to make sure we line it up in a place where we can meet all the fabric and get a nice straight edge. So I'm going to grab my ruler and straighten up this edge of the fabric. And I can go ahead and use the lines on my cutting mat if I wanted to, but I'm just going to grab another ruler. And what I'm going to do is cut these into 2.5-inch strips. Now, to make sure you're lined up really well, you can use the lines on your ruler at the seams. Line up, and then I'm going to cut my 2.5-inch strip. And you'll need to cut 40 of these. So you'll need to cut 40 of these blocks that have a pattern block on the outside and then a background block in the center. So I got one cut and just 39 more to go. So 2.5 inches, line up some lines to make sure you're nice and straight, and then cut your strip. So you just keep cutting all your strip sets down into those 2.5-inch strips. And once you get 40, you can move on to the other strip set. All right, so now that I have my 40 strip sets cut down to size, I'm going to do the same thing with the strip set that has the pattern in the middle and the background on the outside. I'm going to get a straight edge cut and then just cut 2.5-inch strips from this one as well. So line up my 2.5 inches and cut. Now with this strip set though, we only need to cut 20. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get all of these cut, and then we'll look at how to bring these blocks together. All right, so now I have all my strip sets cut, so I can start bringing them together to make the 9-patch block. So the 9-patch block is going to look just like this. I'll show you how to bring it together. All right, so here is the 9-patch block all laid out, and here are my strips. So all you're going to do is take one of your strips that has the prints on the outside, one that has the print in the middle, and then another that has the prints on the outside. But what I'm doing is turning the prints on the outside so that the same prints are on the diagonal corners. Once you get it all laid out, all you need to do is sew it together. If you really want to keep these points lined up nicely, you can lay these right sides together. And if you pressed as I suggested, you'll be able to nest your seams right here. So you can see those seams are folded in opposite directions. And then you can put a pin through there. So I'm going to put a pin on each side. And then just sew a 1/4-inch seam along there and press. All right, so I'm just going to use my fingers and kind of press that seam over a little bit. Make sure it looks good, and then add some heat. And then I'm going to just do the same thing with the other side. Make sure that the same colors are on the diagonal. Place it right sides together and line up those seams and put a pin in through there. Then I'll just sew a 1/4-inch seam across here again. And I'm not running over the pins, I'm pulling them out just as I get to them. And then again, I'm just going to gently fold over that seam and just check to make sure I like how the points are coming together. Gently press it with my fingers, and then I'll add some heat. And then there is the first block, all finished. All right, so here's the 9-patch block, and you're going to make 20 of these exactly like this. So here is a closer look at the block. So just laid out like this and then brought together. Finish the block should measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. So if you need to trim it down, you can go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm going to get 20 of these made, and then I'll show you how to bring together the larger block. All right, now that I have all the 9 patches sewn together, I'm going to join them together with the 6.5-inch background squares that we cut at the beginning and put them in a 9-patch pattern. So let me show you how that will look. All right, so here is the 9-patch layout. To bring it together, just sew your rows together. And then once you sew the rows together, press them and then bring each of the rows together, making sure you keep your layout design the way you like it. All right, so here is the double 9-patch block all finished. I have 4 of them. They all look exactly the same. So that is block 1 for this quilt. Next week, I'll be showing you how to put together the log cabin house block. Now, just keep in mind with this block, it is a large block. It finishes at 18.5 by 18.5 inches. If you're a little over or if the block's off a little bit, just go ahead and trim it to that size. All right, I hope you had fun putting this block together, and I hope you join me next week to put together the next block for this quilt. I'll see you then. Bye.